I almost choked. When my sister told my niece one day, "This house will be yours," and my mom turned to me with a smile like it was already settled. So I said, "Since when do you have a say about my house?" When I was 26, I found a listing for a lakefront cabin about 40 minutes outside of town. And I'm using the word cabin generously. The roof had a tarp on it. The deck had collapsed on one side. The previous owner had died and his kids wanted nothing to do with it. So they listed it for $83,000 just to get rid of it. I was 3 years into running my own electrical contracting company, had saved aggressively, and I saw what that place could be. I bought it outright. No help from anyone. And then I spent the next 4 years of weekends, holidays, and vacation days turning it into something real. New roof, new deck, rewired the whole thing myself, replumbed it with my Uncle Pete's help, refinished the hardwood floors by hand, built a stone fire pit down by the water. By the time I was done, that place appraised at $340,000. My name is Jake. I'm 33. I'm an electrician by trade, and I own a small contracting company that keeps me busy enough to feel useful and tired enough to sleep well. I've got a girlfriend named Meg, who's been in my life for 2 years, and who is, without exaggeration, the most grounded person I've ever met. And I've got a family that has spent most of my adult life treating my lake house like it belongs to all of them. Let me explain. My dad left when I was 12, just gone one morning. My mom Linda raised me and my older sister Courtney on her own, and she has never once let either of us forget that. She's not a monster. She's not some cartoon villain who screams and throws things. She's worse than that in some ways because she's subtle. Everything is wrapped in guilt and framed as family loyalty. If she wants something, she doesn't demand it. She implies that refusing would make you ungrateful for everything she sacrificed. My sister Courtney is 4 years older than me and has been the golden child since birth. She married a guy named Todd who sells insurance and has the personality of a damp handshake. They've got 2 kids. The older one, Olivia, is 14, and honestly a good kid who has nothing to do with any of this. I want to be clear about that. Now here's the thing about the lake house. The moment I finished renovating it, my family decided it was a shared resource. My mom started telling people she helped me buy it, which she didn't. Courtney began booking weekends there without asking, bringing Todd and the kids up for long weekends and leaving the place trashed. My mom would give out the access code to cousins and church friends. I'd show up on a Friday to find someone else's dishes in the sink. I put a stop to most of that about 2 years ago, changed the locks, set boundaries, told my mom clearly that the house was mine and visits needed to be scheduled through me. She cried. Courtney called me selfish. Todd sent me a long text about how family properties should be treated with generosity. I ignored all of it and moved on. Or I thought I did. This past Christmas, we all gathered at my mom's house. Me, Meg, Courtney, Todd. The kids, Uncle Pete, a few cousins. My mom does a big dinner every year, and it's one of those events where saying no creates more drama than just showing up. So we showed up, dinner was fine. Turkey was dry, which is tradition at this point. Uncle Pete told the same story about the time he accidentally soldered a water line to a gas fitting in 1987. The kids were on their tablets. Normal stuff. Then, right as dessert was being served, Courtney stood up. She had this look on her face. You know that expression people get when they've been rehearsing something in the bathroom mirror, that she put her arm around Olivia, who was sitting next to her, and said, "I just want to make a little announcement." She looked right at me. We've been talking as a family, and we've decided that when the time comes, the lake house is going to stay in the family. Olivia is going to have a beautiful place to grow up visiting and eventually to call her own. She smiled at Olivia like she was handing her a diploma. I looked at my mom. She was nodding, not surprised, not reacting like this was news. She said, "It's only right. That house should stay in the family. Jake, you've done a wonderful job with it, and this way it lives on." Everyone at the table turned to me. Courtney was beaming. Todd had this smug little half grin. Even a few cousins were nodding along like this with some heartwarming moment, and I just sat there because here's what nobody at that table knew. 2 months before that dinner back in October, my Uncle Pete had called me with a question. A strange one. He asked if I'd recently added my mom to my homeowner's insurance policy. I told him, no, obviously no. Why would I do that? He said a buddy of his who works at the same insurance company mentioned seeing Linda's name pop up on my account. Pete didn't know the details. He just thought it was weird and figured he'd ask. I made a call the next morning, and what I found out changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back at the Christmas table, everyone was still staring at me, waiting for the grateful smile, the teary nod. Of course, anything for family speech they'd already written in their heads. I set my fork down, pulled out my phone, and opened an app. And in under 5 minutes, every plan they'd been quietly building behind my back started falling apart. I'll tell you exactly what I did. But first, you need to understand what I found in October, because that's where the real betrayal started. So let me take you back to October. After Uncle Pete's call, I contacted my insurance company first thing Monday morning. I told them I wanted to review my homeowner's policy for the lake house, specifically. any recent changes to the account. The woman on the phone pulled it up and asked me to verify a few things, then said, "It looks like your spouse was added as a named insured back in August." I said I don't have a spouse. Silence on her end for about 3 seconds. Then she read me the name, Linda Brennan, my mother. She'd called the insurance company, identified herself as my spouse, provided enough personal information to pass their verification, and had herself added to my policy. The rep told me they'd look into it and that I should probably speak with their fraud department. I said I would. Then I hung up and sat in my truck in the parking lot of a job site for about 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. I want to be honest with you. My first reaction wasn't anger. It was confusion, not because I couldn't believe she'd do it. On some level, I think I always knew my mom was capable of something like this. The confusion was about why. What was the angle adding yourself to someone's insurance policy doesn't give you ownership. It doesn't transfer the deed. So what was she actually doing? I didn't confront her. That's important. Everything in me wanted to pick up the phone and say, "What the hell are you doing?" But I didn't. I've learned over the years that when you confront people like my mother too early, they just adjust the lie. They cover tracks, they cry and reframe the whole thing until suddenly you're the one apologizing. So instead, I started pulling at threads. The first thread came about a week later. I was going through some paperwork in my office, contracts, receipts, insurance docs, and I found something in my mailbox at the lake house that I'd almost thrown away. It was a letter from a paralegal's office addressed to the Brennan family residence. Inside was a copy of a document titled Memorandum of Verbal Agreement. Here's where it gets interesting. The document claimed that in 2019, Linda Brennan had loaned me $40,000 for the purchase of the lake house property, and that in exchange I had verbally agreed to grant her a shared interest in the home. It was dated, it was notarized, and it looked just official enough to fool someone who didn't know any better. There was one problem. Well, several problems, but here's the big one. My mom did loan me $40,000 in 2019, but it had nothing to do with the lake house. I'd already owned the lake house for 3 years by then. The loan was for a new work truck when my old one blew a transmission, and I repaid every cent of it over 18 months. I had the canceled checks to prove it. Someone had taken a real transaction, changed the purpose, and turned it into a fabricated legal claim against my property. I called a real estate attorney the next day, not a family friend, not someone connected to anyone I knew. A woman named Karen Adler, whose office was 2 towns over, and who came recommended by a contractor buddy of mine. I sat in her office, showed her the document, told her the real story, and watched her expression go from professional interest to something closer to quiet disbelief. She said, "This is not a legally binding instrument, but if your mother were to file this with a court or present it during a dispute, it could create a cloud on your title that you'd have to spend time and money clearing. That's likely the point." I asked her who would have drafted something like this. She said it looked like paralegal work, not a licensed attorney. Someone who knew enough to make it look real, but not enough to make it actually hold up. That night, I told me everything. We were sitting on the couch at my apartment, and I laid it all out. The insurance, the fake document, the loan, all of it. Me listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love about her. When I finished, she said, "Your mom's not doing this alone. She doesn't know how insurance companies work. She doesn't know any paralegals." She was right, and I had a pretty good idea who was helping her. Todd, my brother-in-law, the insurance adjuster. It made perfect sense. Todd would know how to navigate an insurance company's phone system. He'd know what information to provide, what questions to expect, how to add someone to a policy. And Todd's cousin, I'd met her once at a barbecue, worked as a paralegal at a small firm downtown. So now I had the full picture. My mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law had been working together to create a paper trail that would give my mom a legal-looking claim to my house. The insurance policy, the fabricated agreement, probably more I hadn't found yet, all building toward the moment when they could turn to me and say, "This house belongs to the family, and we have the documents to prove it." Now let me bring you back to Christmas dinner. I'm sitting at the table. Courtney just announced that Olivia would be inheriting my house. My mom confirmed it with a nod. Everyone's looking at me, and I've known about all of this for 2 months. What I did next was simple. I pulled out my phone, opened my security camera app, and changed every access code to the lake house. Front door, side door, garage gate, to the dock, all of it. New codes generated randomly saved only on my phone. Took me about 4 minutes. Then I looked up and said, "Nobody is inheriting my house." The table went quiet. Not the kind of quiet where people are thinking. The kind where people stop breathing. Courtney's smile stayed frozen on her face for about 2 seconds too long. Then it dropped. She said, "Jake, we talked about this." I said, "No, you talked about this with Mom and Todd without me." And the answer is no. My mom leaned forward. She had that voice. You know, the one, the trembling, wounded voice she uses when she wants everyone in the room to see her as the victim. She said, "Jake, after everything I've done for you, after the money I gave you for that house, you're going to sit here and disrespect this family." I looked right at her and said, "What money did you give me for the house, Mom?" She blinked just once, but I saw it. That flicker of someone realizing they might have made a mistake. She said, "The $40,000, Jake. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I said, the $40,000 you loaned me in 2019 for my work truck, the $40,000 I paid back in full by 2021. That $40,000, nobody said anything. Todd shifted in his chair. Courtney looked at my mom. My mom looked at the tablecloth. I stood up, put my hand on Meg's shoulder, and said, Merry Christmas, everyone. We left. In the car, me didn't say a word for about 5 minutes. Then she looked at me and said, You've been sitting on this for 2 months. I said I needed to know the whole picture first. She nodded. Then she said, So what happens now? I told her, now they panic. And when people panic, they make mistakes. I wasn't wrong about that. The call started the night we left Christmas dinner. First it was Courtney. 3 calls in a row. All declined. Then a text that said, You humiliated me in front of the whole family. We need to talk. Then another text 20 minutes later. Mom is crying. Are you happy? Then my mom called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was about 90 seconds long and consisted mostly of her saying she couldn't believe I would throw her generosity back in her face and that she hoped I was proud of myself. Classic Linda. Not a single word about the fake document or the insurance policy. Just the performance. Todd didn't call. Todd never calls directly. Todd operates through Courtney like a ventriloquist. I didn't respond to any of it. Not that night, not the next day, not the whole week. I just went dark. Me and I drove up to the lake house the day after Christmas, sat on the deck with coffee and watched the ice forming along the shoreline. It was the quietest holiday I'd had in years. But behind the scenes, I was busy. The first thing I did after Christmas was meet with Karen Adler again, my real estate attorney. I brought everything. The fabricated memorandum, printouts from the insurance company, showing when my mother was added to the policy, my canceled checks, proving the loan repayment bank statements, the original loan text messages between me and my mom from 2019 where she explicitly said, This is for the truck. Pay me back when you can. I'd never deleted those messages, thank God. Karen looked at all of it and said, Here's what I recommend. First, we do a full title search on your property to confirm there are no liens or filings you don't know about. Second, we get a formal affidavit from you documenting the true nature of the loan and the repayment. Third, we contact the insurance company's fraud division and file a formal complaint. I said, and the fake document, she said, if your mother or anyone acting on her behalf attempts to file that with a court, it becomes fraud. Right now, it's sitting in a drawer. It's not filed anywhere, but the moment it surfaces in any legal proceeding, we can use it against them. We started all of it that week. The title search came back clean. Nobody had filed anything against my property yet. That was a relief. But Karen said it also meant they were probably waiting, building their case piece by piece, planning to present it all at once when they thought the timing was right. The Christmas dinner announcement was supposed to be step 1. Get me to agree publicly in front of witnesses, lock me in emotionally, then pull out the paperwork later if I tried to back out. It would have worked on a lot of people. It almost worked on me 2 years ago before I changed the locks. Back then, I might have nodded along just to keep the peace. But I'm not that version of myself anymore. In January, I did something that felt small but turned out to be the most important move I made. I called my mom, not to confront her, not to argue. I called to have a normal conversation. I asked how she was doing after the holidays. I asked about her knee, which had been bothering her. I kept it light and warm and familiar, and about 15 minutes into the call, I casually brought up the old truck loan. I said, Hey, Mom. I was doing my taxes, and I just wanted to confirm that $40,000 you loaned me back in 2019 for the truck. I paid the last installment in March of 2021, right? And without missing a beat, she said, Yeah, that sounds right. March or April, I said. And that was just for the truck, right? I want to make sure I'm not mixing up my records. She said, Of course it was for the truck, Jake. What else would it be for? My state is a one-party consent state for recording. I recorded the entire call. She confirmed in her own words that the loan was for the truck and had been repaid. The fabricated memorandum claiming the loan was for the house was now contradicted by the person who supposedly wrote it. I saved the recording in 3 places: my phone, my laptop, and a USB drive I gave to Uncle Pete for safekeeping. Pete didn't ask questions. He just put it in his gun safe and said, Let me know when you need it. February was when things got strange. Courtney and Todd started showing up at the lake house not to visit me. I know this because I have cameras. They pulled up one Saturday afternoon with a man I didn't recognize. Tall guy, khakis, clipboard. He walked around the exterior of the house, took measurements, and peered through the windows, while Courtney stood by the car smiling. I called Courtney that evening. Hey, Court, noticed you stopped by the lake house today. She paused, then said, Oh yeah, we were just driving through the area and wanted to show a friend the property. The guy with the clipboard. Another pause longer. He's a contractor. We were thinking about what the house might need down the road for Olivia. I let that hang in the air for a second. Then I said, Courtney, we talked about this. The house isn't going to Olivia. It's my house. She laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind of laugh people use when they want to make you feel like you're being ridiculous. Jake Mama's paperwork. I think you know that. We don't need to make this adversarial. There it was. She just confirmed she knew about the fabricated document and she just told me they intended to use it. I said, Okay, If that's the direction you want to go, I respect that, but I'd suggest you talk to a real attorney before you do anything with that paperwork. She hung up on. In March, Karen sent a formal cease and desist letter not to Courtney, to my mother. The letter stated that any claim to my property based on the fabricated memorandum of verbal agreement was without legal basis. It noted that the loan referenced in the document had been fully repaid and was for a vehicle purchase, not the property. It stated that any attempt to file the memorandum with a court or county recorder would be treated as fraud. And it mentioned almost as an aside that the unauthorized addition of Linda Brennan to my homeowner's insurance policy had been reported to the insurance company's fraud division and was under active review. The letter was sent via certified mail. My mom signed for it on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, I had 14 missed calls. My mom, Courtney, Todd. My mom again, an unknown number that turned out to be Todd's cousin, the paralegal, calling to ask if I really wanted to involve attorneys in a family matter. I didn't answer any of them. On Thursday, Todd called from his own phone for the first time in years. His voice was different, controlled, professional. He said, "Jake, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Your mother loves you. Courtney loves you. Nobody is trying to take anything from you. We just want to sit down as a family and work this out." I said, "I'm happy to sit down." At my attorney's office next week, he said he'd talk to Courtney and get back to me. That Friday night, me and I were at the lake house making dinner. My phone buzzed with a text from Courtney. It said, "Fine, we'll meet with your lawyer, but this is going to destroy Mom. I hope you know that." I showed it to me. She read it, handed the phone back, and said, "She's not worried about your mom. She's worried about herself." Meanwhile, something was happening at the insurance company that none of them knew about yet. The fraud investigation had been opened, and an investigator had already pulled the phone records from August when my mother called to add herself to my policy. They had the recording of the call. They could hear her identify herself as my spouse. They could hear her provide my social security number, which she apparently had memorized from doing my taxes when I was a teenager. The investigator contacted me for a statement. I gave one. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I said, "Not yet." I said I wanted to see how the family meeting went first. He understood. He said, "We'll keep the file open." And just like that, every piece was in place. The recorded phone call, the canceled checks, the text messages, the title search, the cease and desist, the insurance fraud investigation, my attorney. All they had was a fake document, a lot of entitlement, and a meeting they thought they could still talk their way out of. They had no idea what was coming. The meeting was set for the following Wednesday at Karen Adler's office. 10 o'clock in the morning, conference room on the second floor of a small brick building downtown. Karen had told me to arrive at 9:30 to review everything one more time. I got there at 9:15. Karen had everything organized in a binder, tabs for each piece of evidence, the fabricated memorandum, my canceled checks, the bank statements, the text messages from 2019, the recorded phone call transcript, the cease and desist, the insurance fraud report. She'd even printed out screenshots of my security camera footage showing Courtney and Todd bringing the contractor to my property without permission. She looked at me and said, "If they come in here with any attorney who's halfway competent, that attorney is going to tell them to fold. If they come in here without an attorney, they're going to try to make this emotional. Don't let them." I nodded. At 10:05, they walked in. All three of them. My mom, Courtney, and Todd. No attorney. My mom was dressed like she was going to church. Nice blouse, hair, done full makeup. She looked like she'd been practicing her concerned but dignified mother face in the car. Courtney was in a business casual outfit that I suspect she thought made her look like she belonged in a law office. Todd was in a suit that didn't quite fit right in the shoulders. They sat down across the conference table from me and Karen. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Then my mom looked at me with those eyes. The soft ones, the ones she used when she wanted you to remember that she raised you alone, that she worked doubles at the hospital, that she gave up her 20s so you could have a childhood. She said, "Jake, sweetheart, can we please just talk about this like a family?" Karen spoke first, professionally calmly. She said, "Mrs. Brennan, thank you for coming in. I'm Karen Adler. I represent Jake in all matters related to his lakefront property. I want to make sure we all understand the situation clearly before we have any discussion." She opened the binder. In August of last year, someone contacted Jake's homeowner's insurance provider, identified themselves as Jake's spouse, and added your name to his policy. Jake did not authorize this. The insurance company has opened a fraud investigation. My mom's face didn't change, but her hands, which were folded on the table, tightened. Karen continued. In October, Jake received a document titled Memorandum of Verbal Agreement that claims you loaned him $40,000 in 2019 for the purchase of the lake house property. This document is not accurate. She pulled out the canceled checks and the bank statements. Jake was loaned $40,000 in 2019 for the purchase of a work vehicle. The loan was fully repaid by March of 2021. These are the records. She pulled out the text message printouts. These are text messages between Jake and Mrs. Brennan from 2019, in which the loan is explicitly described as being for Jake's truck. She pulled out the transcript, and this is a transcript of a recorded phone call from January of this year in which Mrs. Brennan confirms in her own words that the loan was for the truck and had been fully repaid. The room was dead quiet. My mom was looking at the table, not at me, not at Karen. At the table, Courtney was looking at my mom. Her expression had shifted from confident to something I can only describe as recalculating, like she was running the math in her head and the numbers weren't adding up the way she'd expected. Todd was staring at Karen's binder like it was a live grenade. Karen let the silence sit for a moment. Then she said, "I want to be direct. The fabricated memorandum, if presented in any legal proceeding, would constitute fraud. The insurance policy manipulation is already under investigation and could result in criminal charges. Jake has been patient and measured throughout this process, but this office is prepared to pursue every available legal remedy if necessary." Then she stopped talking and she looked at me. That was my cue. I leaned forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I said, "Mom, I know about the document. I know Todd's cousin helped draft it. I know Todd walked you through how to call the insurance company. I know Courtney brought a contractor to my house to start planning renovations for a property that doesn't belong to any of you." Todd opened his mouth. I held up my hand. Not aggressively, just enough. "I'm not finished." He closed it. I said, "I built that house with my own hands. I paid for it with my own money. I owe none of you anything for it. And the fact that you went behind my back to create fake documents and commit insurance fraud to try to take it from me is something I'm still processing, honestly." I looked at my mom. She had tears running down her face. Quiet ones, not the performative kind she usually deployed. These were real. I could tell because she wasn't looking at anyone to make sure they noticed. I said, "I don't want to press charges. I don't want to go to court, but I need something from you, and it's not negotiable." Karen slid a single document across the table. It was a written declaration prepared by Karen's office, stating that Linda Brennan had no ownership interest, legal claim, financial claim, or any other claim of any kind to my lakefront property. It acknowledged that the 2019 loan was for a vehicle and had been repaid in full. It acknowledged that the memorandum of verbal agreement was inaccurate and invalid. Karen said if Mrs. Brennan signs this document today, Jake has agreed not to pursue criminal charges related to the insurance fraud. He will also not file a complaint against the paralegal who drafted the fabricated memorandum. My mom stared at the document. She didn't pick it up. Courtney, who had been quiet this entire time, finally spoke. She didn't look at me. She looked at my mom, and what she said surprised me. "You told me you had a real agreement with him." My mom didn't answer. "Mom, you told me there was a real document. You said Jake promised." My mom still didn't answer. Her hands were shaking slightly. Courtney stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor. She looked at Todd, and whatever she saw in his face made hers go cold. She said, "You knew. You both knew this wasn't real, and you brought me into it." Todd said, "Court, it's more complicated than that." "It's not complicated at all, Todd." She turned to me. For the first time in maybe 10 years, my sister looked at me without performing. No rehearsed expression, no angle, just a person standing in a room realizing she'd been used. She said, "I didn't know it was fake Jake." I believed her partially. Courtney is capable of a lot of things, but the look on her face when she turned on our mom was too raw to be staged. She'd been told a story, and she believed it because believing it was easier than questioning it. My mom finally looked up. She said, "I just wanted to keep the family together." I said, "No, Mom. You wanted to keep control." She flinched. Actually flinched like the words had weight. Nobody spoke for about 10 seconds. Then Karen gently tapped the document and said, "Mrs. Brennan, I'd recommend having your own attorney review this before signing, but I'd also recommend not waiting too long. The insurance investigation will proceed on its own timeline, regardless of what happens in this room." My mom picked up the pen Karen had placed next to the document. She signed it. No negotiation, no counteroffer, no final speech about sacrifice and family loyalty. She just signed it, set the pen down, and stared at the paper like she was watching something die. And then something happened that I wasn't prepared for. Not from Karen, not from Courtney, or Todd from the insurance company. Karen's phone buzzed during the silence. She glanced at it, then looked at me and said, "Jake, can I speak with you in the hallway for a moment?" We stepped out. She showed me an email from the insurance company's fraud investigator. He'd been copied on the cease and desist we'd sent, and he was writing to inform us that based on his investigation, the company had decided to pursue the matter independently. They were filing their own fraud complaint against Linda Brennan, not a criminal referral to police. An internal complaint that would go to their corporate legal team and potentially result in a civil action for damages, penalties, and recovery of costs. Karen said, "This isn't something we can stop. The insurance company is acting on its own now." I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. The first domino had fallen, and the one behind it was already tipping. The weeks after the meeting were messy in the way real life is messy. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a slow, uncomfortable unraveling of things that have been held together by silence and obligation for too long. My mom called me 3 days after she signed the document. She didn't cry this time. She sounded tired. She said, "Jake, I got a letter from the insurance company. They're saying I might owe them money. They're saying I committed fraud." I said, You did commit fraud, Mom. Silence. Then I didn't think of it that way. I said, I know you didn't. That's part of the problem. She asked me if I could call the insurance company and tell them it was a misunderstanding. I told her I couldn't. I told her the company was handling it independently and that she needed to get her own attorney, a real one, not a paralegal friend of Todd's cousin. She said, I can't afford an attorney, Jake. I told her I was sorry and I meant it. I genuinely was sorry that it had come to this. But I also knew that if I stepped in to fix the consequences of what she'd done, nothing would ever change. She'd learned that there was always a safety net, and the next time she wanted something that wasn't hers, she'd just find a more creative way to grab it. I did one thing, though. I called Uncle Pete that evening and asked him to help my mom find a lawyer who worked on a sliding fee scale. Pete said he'd handle it. He also said, your mom called me crying an hour ago. She's scared. I said, good, she should be. Pete paused, then said, you're handling this the right way, kid. Your dad would have folded. You're not your dad. That hit harder than I expected. The insurance company's civil action moved slowly the way these things do. My mom's attorney negotiated it down significantly. In the end, she was required to pay back the premiums the company had covered during the period she was fraudulently listed, plus a penalty fee and the investigation costs. The total came to a little over $7,000. Not life-ruining, but enough to sting enough to feel real. She paid it over 6 months. I know because Uncle Pete told me. I didn't ask. Courtney and I didn't speak for almost 2 months after the meeting. When she finally called, it was late on a Sunday night. I was at the lake house reading. Me was already asleep. I saw Courtney's name on my phone and almost didn't pick up, but something told me this call was going to be different. It was. She said, I need to tell you something and I need you to just listen. I said, okay. She said, Todd and I are in a bad place. We've been in a bad place for a while, but this whole thing cracked it open. I found out after the meeting that Todd had been talking to Mom about your house for over a year. He's the one who suggested the memorandum. He's the one who connected Mom with his cousin. He told me it was all legitimate. He told me there was a real agreement and that you were just being difficult. She took a breath. I could hear it shaking. I should have asked you directly. I should have picked up the phone and said, Jake, is this true? But I didn't because it was easier to believe Mom and Todd than to believe I was being lied to by my own husband. And I'm sorry for that. I sat there for a while. The lake was completely still outside the window. No wind, no waves, just glass. I said, I appreciate you telling me that. She said, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I said, I know, but I hear you. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a movie moment where the music swells and siblings hug. It was two adults acknowledging what happened without pretending it was okay. That felt more honest than anything we'd shared in years. Now here's where Todd's story goes. Courtney confronted him after the attorney meeting, and whatever that conversation looked like, it wasn't pretty. From what I pieced together, Todd had been the architect of the whole scheme. He'd convinced my mom she had a legitimate moral claim to the house. He'd walked her through the insurance call. He'd arranged his cousin to draft the document, and none of it was about Olivia or family legacy. Todd had been struggling financially for 2 years and saw my property as a future asset he could leverage. He knew that if my mother could establish even a partial claim, it could eventually be used as collateral or sold under pressure. The whole thing was his long game. Courtney filed for separation in April. They were officially divorced by fall. I didn't celebrate that. Divorce is ugly, especially with kids involved. But I wasn't going to pretend Todd hadn't earned it. His cousin, the paralegal, quietly resigned from her firm when word got around. Karen said she probably wouldn't face formal consequences since the document was never filed, but her reputation took a hit. Sometimes, that's enough. As for me and my mom, we're in a strange place. Honest, but strange. She came to the lake house once about 4 months after everything settled. I invited her, just her. We sat on the deck and she was quiet for a long time, which is unusual for my mother. Then she said, I don't know when I started thinking I was owed things. I didn't have an answer for that. I don't think she expected one. She said she'd started seeing a therapist, something Uncle Pete had apparently been suggesting for years. I told her I was glad. I meant it. We're not close. I don't call her every week. She doesn't come to the lake house regularly. But when we do talk, it's different, quieter, less performed. She's learning slowly that she can have a relationship with me that isn't built on guilt and obligation. Whether she sticks with it or not, I can't control. But the door is open and I told her that. Courtney and I talk more now than we did before all of this, which I know sounds backwards, but something about having the worst version of our family dynamic exposed and dealt with actually made space for something more real. She's raising Olivia and her younger son mostly on her own now, and she's tough enough to do it. Todd has the kids every other weekend. Courtney told me Olivia asked about the lake house recently, not about inheriting it. She asked if she could come visit this summer and go swimming. I said, of course. Uncle Pete comes up to the lake house almost every weekend now. He brings his fishing gear, his terrible jokes, and a 6-pack of whatever cheap beer is on sale. He sits on the dock for hours and catches nothing, and seems perfectly happy about it. He's the family I got to choose. Even though technically I didn't choose him, he just showed up and never stopped. Me and I are good, better than good. She moved into the lake house with me in May, and for the first time it actually feels like a home and not a battleground. She hung curtains in the kitchen and planted herbs by the back door and put a little sign on the deck that says, The Brennans. I told her my last name isn't Brennan anymore in any way that matters. She said, Yeah, it is. You're just the good one. I'm sitting on that deck right now typing this. The lake is doing that thing where the sunset turns the whole surface orange. Me is inside making dinner. Pete's truck is in the driveway because he left his cooler here yesterday and swore he'd pick it up today, but I can see through the window that he's already sitting at the kitchen table talking Meg's ear off. This isn't the ending I would have written for myself. It's messier than that. There are still things that hurt when I think about them too long. My mom manipulating my insurance. My sister announcing my house would go to her daughter like I was already gone. Todd sitting at that Christmas table with that smug grin knowing exactly what he'd set in motion. But here's what I know now. The house was never really what this was about. The house was just the thing they could see and touch and want. What they were really trying to take was my ability to say no. And when I finally said it clearly and calmly and with evidence to back it up, the whole thing collapsed. Not because I was smarter or tougher or better, but because the truth is really hard to argue with when someone actually writes it down. If you're in a situation like this, here's my only advice. Document everything. Tell no one until you're ready. And when you finally act, do it once. Do it right. And don't apologize for protecting what's yours. The lake house is mine. It always was, and now everyone knows that.